I would say that we should start. So, yeah, I take the... wait a second. Yes. So let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Misha Maslennikov, and I'm policy advisor on tax dossiers at Oxfam Italy. The first session of this domestic panel, I'm privileged to chair, will be dedicated to the most recent developments related to the so-called Pillar 2. The EU Tax Observatory's Global Tax Evasion Report, presented today, acknowledges the strong efforts in international cooperation on tax matters displayed in the past decade and praises the Pillar 2 underlining objective to curb BEPS practices and the global race to the bottom in corporate taxation by subduing large multinational to minimum effective taxation in each jurisdiction they operate in. At the same time, as we have heard during the roundtable and reading the report raises also criticism on some elements of the agreed design of the global rules, inter alia the low rate, the economic substance carve-outs, and the treatment of tax credits. I should not be the one commenting on this issue, but having heard the lively discussion between David Bradbury and Gabriel Zuckman, I would say that what worries us is not the need for the sought neutrality between grants and tax incentives, but maybe the bias in considering as qualified refundable tax credits many of existing tax credits, let alone the comment that I really much appraise by Giacomo Ricotti on the fact that there needs to be likely a sort of trade-off in the treatment also for the sake of ETR computation of the nature of tax credits. So this criticism, of course, are related to the reduction of the revenue potential of the global minimum tax, and it is, of course, due to the fact that these so-called loopholes could pave possibly the way to nuanced and less transparent forms of tax competition. To discuss these issues, we have with us two highly distinguished and expert speakers. On my left, there is Marco Juvinale, Director for EU and International Affairs at the Ministry of Finance, and Professor Tommaso Di Tanno, Professor of Tax Law at the Lewis University. As a starting point, so as a jump starter, we have asked Marco to briefly remind us of the process that led to the two-pillar solution and the EU directive implementing Pillar 2, to address specifically the Pillar 2 conversation might expand for hours, but to address specifically the contentious elements of the global rules design flagged in the report, such as the carve-outs and the tax credit treatments, or other, to some extent, disputed elements, such as the choices made on accounting principles. As well, we asked Marco to tell us more on specific choices that Italy has been putting forward while preparing. Almost done, and it was a huge effort by the ministry in drafting legislation to transpose the EU directive into domestic law, and on the choices and deemed intentions by other inclusive framework jurisdictions. So, Marco, I leave the floor to you for 15 plus minutes. It's going to be not a challenge, but I know that you are super good with times. And then we also have a conversation with Tommaso and Marco themselves. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Misha, and thanks also for the invitation to this seminar. So maybe let's start from reminding where we started this discussion on the global minimum tax, and it was with the BEPS project. The BEPS project was essentially trying to tackling base erosion and profit shifting through some, say, pillars, alignment between taxation and value creation, making more coherence between tax systems and also transparency. And in particular, the coherence of tax system was addressed in some BEPS action, including the CFC, which is also inspired the Pillar 2. After that, it was in 2017, the introduction in the United States of the GILTI, which is essentially a minimum tax on the foreign global income, although not on jurisdictional basis, but on a worldwide basis. And this, to a certain extent, inspired the Pillar 2, which is basically the idea to having a minimum tax for large multinational company in each jurisdiction where they operate. In terms of scope, I mean, large M&Es are the companies in the scope because essentially the profit shifting is attributed mainly to the large jurisdiction. Already the BEPS project under Action 13, country-by-country reporting, focused on the M&Es with more than 750 million revenue on a consolidated basis. At European level, because of the EU law, there is also large domestic groups which are included in the scope, and there are few exclusions justified for, good reasons, because essentially investment vehicles are out of scope because to preserve their tax neutrality when they are ultimate parent company of a group. Non-profit organization, international organization, and government entity, which are typically not taxed, also according to tax treaty. The only sector which is outside the scope of Pillar 2 is the international shipping under certain conditions, but this is also because of the peculiarity of these sectors and the typically applied the specific tax like the tonnage tax, in particular in the European Union. The global minimum tax try to achieve this objective of having a kind of level playing field, a minimum level of taxation through three interlinked rules, mainly the top-up tax is applied where there is taxation in a particular jurisdiction below 50% and 50%, and the effective tax rate is calculated according to common rules across the world. There are three, taxes, three ways to collect top-up taxes, and the rules follow a precise order, as has been reminded in the previous panel. The QDMTT, the Qualified Domestic Minimum Top-Up Tax, is applied by the source jurisdiction, and this is mainly aimed at ensuring that the jurisdiction where the M&E has a low taxation collect the tax, and this is particularly a request coming from the developing countries in the negotiations. And then if there is no QDMTT, because it's an optional element of the design, the income inclusion rule will be triggered, and so the ultimate parent entity, or under certain condition, the intermediate parent entity or the partially owned parent entity collect the top-up tax in the jurisdiction where the M&E is headquartered. And then, as has been reminded, there is the fallback rule, the UTPR, which ensures the taxation in the jurisdiction that has implemented a global rule, and those jurisdictions and those entities comes into question in cases where there is no QDMTT or income inclusion rule, and the share of the top-up tax is attributed according to the formula essentially based on the substance activity in this jurisdiction. And this is the assumption here is to make the collection of tax in the jurisdiction where it's more likely that there is profit shifting, say where there is economic substance. As said, the calculation of the top-up tax is based on common rules, so the effective tax rate essentially is a fraction between the covered tax and the global income in each jurisdiction where the M&E operate. And the top-up tax is the difference between 50% and the effective tax rate in the jurisdiction. And this is calculated on the jurisdictional excess profit, so the global income less the substance-based income exclusion that has been also reminded in the previous discussion, which is a percentage of the payroll and tangible asset in this jurisdiction. I will come back on this later. Maybe some feature of the global rule. The first one is the reliance on accounting standards. So, the basic, the starting point here is to take into consideration the financial accounts of each M&E that are prepared for the consolidated financial statements. So the decision was to refer to the accounting to the financial accounts rather than the tax information, because there is less difference among accounting standard than tax rule across the inclusive framework jurisdiction. As you know, there are more than 140 jurisdictions that participated to the negotiation. There is also wide developments of the IFRS as accounting standard used by the large M&Es around the world. And there is also, limited risk of manipulation on the accounting standard, because clearly the accounting, the financial accounts are made for, say, also the commercial purposes and also for investor information. And clearly they are typically audited by external audit firms. Indeed, there are some safeguards in order to avoid possible distortion coming from differences in the accounting standard. There are different safeguards, but the most important one is the so-called adjustment for market competitive, the material competitive distortion, in case where the M&E has used an accounting standard which is different from the accepted financial standard, which is still contemplated by the rules, but the difference between the IFRS and the standard used is presents a difference which are with a materiality threshold of 75 million for the group, for the entire group. And then there is also the QD which use the accounting standard with the possibility of using, instead of, as a general rule, the UPE, the ultimate parent entity accounting standard, the local accounting standard in the jurisdiction where the QD is collected. And this was, requested in order to ensure a compliance in the local jurisdiction, because normally M&E are used to use this accounting standard in the jurisdiction. Again, this is under certain conditions, so the M&E needs to be required to apply this local financial standard in the jurisdiction in order to benefit to this choice. And there will be a discussion in order to ensure that competitive distortions cannot arise from the difference between accounting standards. It's already been mentioned that the tax credit are one of the contentious issues, I would say, of these rules. Here, the rationale for the treatment of tax credit is to ensure neutrality between grants and tax credits, and that's the reason why the rules elaborated the concept of the qualified refundable tax credit, which essentially is a tax credit that is repayable in 4 years. And it is comparable to grant. Clearly, this means that in terms of accounting treatment, grants are treated as income, typically, so the denominator of the fraction I indicated above, and clearly the qualified refundable tax credit will be treated in the same way. So they will go in the denominator, and so the impact on the effective tax rate is lower than a non-refundable tax credit. The non-refundable tax credit clearly does not have the feature of the refundable. It is not repayable by design feature in 4 years. Typically, tax credits which are offsettable only against corporate income tax liability are considered non-refundable tax credit. And then also the guidance in July 2023 elaborated the concept of the transferable tax credit, which we know in Italy, also in the US, there are this kind of credits. Again, here the transferability creates a form of liquidity, and then under certain conditions, so transferability in a short timeline, and marketability, so say marketability at a reasonable price market, are the feature for considering this credit as income, essentially, so with less impact on the denominator and the ETR. As said, in Italy, we have clearly the transferable tax credit, which are in this category. The majority of the Italian tax credit are considered refundable tax credit, and this is also because the possibility to offset the tax credit not only against the corporate tax liability, but also other tax liabilities, VAT, for example, but also social security contribution. Then on the substance-based income exclusion, already the previous panel discussed this issue. Clearly here, the rationale of this carve-out was to avoid a negative impact on activity with economic substance, which are clearly as less detrimental in terms of possibility of profit shifting. And that's the reason why there was this preferential treatment. It was inspired by the GILTI provision, because also the GILTI in the US used this, say, notional return on tangible asset. In this case, we have also tangible asset and employees and so on, and payroll. And the carve-out essentially functions as a kind of notional return on some economic activities in a given jurisdiction. And I mean, above this notional return, you have excess profit, which is, prone to profit shifting. The transitional period clearly can be considered generous. Essentially, the idea here was to achieve consensus among jurisdictions, and I would say mainly among European countries, also developing countries, but also European countries that insisted for this transitional period. Essentially was to preserve the certainty on investments already made in certain jurisdictions, and also in some cases MNEs has also agreement with the tax administrations in certain jurisdictions. As you know, in Italy we will implement the directive starting from 1st January 2024. We will introduce the legislation that has been approved by the government includes a QDMTT, so in terms of accounting standard used for the Italian QDMTT, for the time being, the standard in the legislation is the local financial accounting standard used for the purpose of the, say, Italian domestic rules, which can be the ITA gaps, or the OEC gaps, if I may say, or the IFRS, if the MNE and the entity located in Italy use the IFRS because it is provided by the Italian legislation. And clearly here the objective is to comply with the concept of the QDMTT safe harbor, which is going to be elaborated in the OECD, saying that once you have a QDMTT designed in a certain way, it is something that already ensure the application of the rule and the top-up tax, and there is no need to impose additional income inclusion rule on UTPR once you have a QDMTT which is compliant with the standard. Clearly, in terms of we have a separate legislation on this global minimum tax. Clearly, the corporate income tax provision will be applied as compatible in terms of administration, in particular of the rules, and clearly also the filing obligation are aligned to the OECD and European rules. Maybe last slide on the where other countries around the world are. So far, 36 jurisdictions, including European countries, should implement the the global minimum tax. Other 20 will be expected next year. Among the 36, also there are United Kingdom, Japan, Korea. In the EU, as said, there will be the directive. Probably some of the European countries, the small one, will benefit from this possibility to be exempted in the first years because of the number of the M&E in their jurisdictions, but probably they will implement in any case the QDMTT. In the US, as you know, the Biden administration presented the proposal for introducing the global minimum tax featured as the OECD rules, but the Congress was not consensus in the Congress, and so there will be still interaction between the GILTI and the global minimum tax. Two elements here. First, the QDNTT comes first, and so the source jurisdiction will collect the tax before the GILTI comes into action, and so source jurisdiction will come first, then GILTI. And there is also, in case where GILTI is applied, a kind of mechanism to ensure an allocation of the GILTI across jurisdiction, because clearly GILTI is as a global blending, and it's not allocated in each jurisdiction. And the expectation is also that developing countries, including African countries, will introduce the QDNTT, because that's clearly help the, domestic resource mobilization.
Thank you very much, Marco. Quite punctual, and especially thanks a lot for your sharpness and pointedness. I would like to start a little bit of a conversation on, maybe, Marco, we can show slide number 6, if that's possible, on a couple of contentious issues that have popped up or not. One, yes, one not in the first session. And, the GMTT designs rely on agreed accounting standards. You said, Marco, that of course common tax rules are very difficult to obtain, and you also view, and let's say the community that agreed to signed under the agreement saw limited risk of manipulation due to external audits, etc., etc. Nonetheless, and that's the question for Professor Di Tanno, just in August, a recent article published in Intertax reminded us that, in a way, or suggested that Pillar 2 can incentivize multinational enterprises to prepare their individual and consolidated financial accounts for tax purposes by using the discretionary leeway that, in a way, and we all know it, it's inherent to accounting standards. In particular, they may use such discretion to report lower revenues to avoid falling within the scope, or to report profits at lower margin or tax expenses at a higher margin to show a sufficiently high ETR. The article, in substance, claimed that this will lead to a deterioration of the quality of financial reporting and of capital allocation. So the question for you is, what's your point of view on this statement? And couldn't the acceptance of almost all common accounting standards under Pillar 2 incentivize also a competition between countries on the gaps, also taking into account what Marco said about a material competitive distortion safeguard?
First of all, let me say that I will act as a pure discussant. So I will raise problem and I will offer some personal point of view. So anything true, but just point of view. On the first problem you raise of a possible distortion of the accounting principle caused by, let's say, a way to avoid the consequences of the application of global minimum tax. My view is that the accounting principle, we are speaking about companies, groups of companies, whose inclusive turnover exceeds around 50 million. So we are speaking about groups that have a large, let's say, financial problem, large financial alternatives large financial problems. So in my view, most of those M&E will act when dealing with accounting principle with a view to the financial market. And I think that the accounting principle, notwithstanding, it is true that they can be curved in order to reduce the application of the global minimum tax. Notwithstanding that, I think that those groups will be much more interested in being acceptable on the financial community, within the financial community, instead of save some money through this application of GMT. In addition, I will say that accounting principle in the case, when speaking about accounting principle, we have to divide international accounting principle, let's say IAS and IFRS, and local GAAP. And of course, the local GAAP applies not only to groups subject to the global minimum tax, but also to groups which are not subject to global minimum tax. So hypothesizing that those who produce the local gaps, not only US GAAP, but let's say also Singapore gaps, Hong Kong gaps, or China gaps, hypothesizing that those people will curve their gap for benefiting some multinational company, in my view, is not real. Is not a real view. So notwithstanding that we might have a certain specific item which might be somewhat optimized for certain very large companies, mainly the digital companies, and I expect that some optimization will be dealt with when speaking about all the immaterials inscribed in the balance sheet of those groups. So notwithstanding there might be some optimization within the accounting principle for certain kinds of companies, I don't share the pessimistic opinion that the accounting principle will be curved in order to avoid the GMT. Once I have to say that when speaking about accounting principle, we include in this aspect also those matters referred to, let's say, the substance-based income exclusion. Because on one side, we have the determination of the global income. On the other side, we have the determination of the excess profit, and the excess profit is a derivation. Is global income subtracted by the SBIE, the SBIE exclusion. This exclusion is very discussable. I understand that through the substance-based income exclusion, the global income may be substantially reduced, and I saw the schedule projected by Gabriel Zuckman, according to which 1.7% of the inclusive amount deriving from the global minimum tax will be subtracted through the substance-based income inclusion. So I understand that there might be some reserve in the application of the substance-based income exclusion. However, my point of view is that this exclusion results in an advantage for, let's say, the true economy, result in advantage for true investment, for material investment, and penalizes the immaterial investment. All of us knows that when speaking about Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, the origination of the thoughts which resulted in Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, the origination was the taxation of digital economy. That was the starting point. So the differentiation between, let's say, the material industry and the immaterial industry, to me, is fully justified, at least is fully justified for the time being. We cannot predict what will happen in a 10 years period. But for the time being, I think that the substance-based income exclusion, attributing an advantage to the material economy and a disadvantage to the immaterial economy, in my view, is fully justified. Thank you.
Okay, I might still stress that probably the generosity in the first phase of this substance-based inclusion poses at least some concerns. I am well aware, for instance, of Professor Joachim English concerns about the fact that generosity could also lead to, at least at the short run, even to book profit shifting in a short run, at least. But point taken, there is a second point, and this is something that, of course, the EU Observatory raised very concretely, criticizing the treatment reserved to tax credits by the global rules. Again, this criticism hinges on the concern that almost all the categories of tax credits, taking also stock on the recent decision on transferable tax credits, could fall into the category of qualified refundable tax credits, so they can indeed lower the ETR, but not as much as if they were treated in the numerator of the ETR formula. At least this is also what Marco reported, so that most of the Italian tax credits would be considered as qualified refundable tax credits. So this could lead to a shift in tax competition, that's the point that the observatory makes, on tax incentives treatable as QRTC. So I would like to hear if you share this concern, and more generally also thinking of the dual world that is going to be created with Pillar 2 groups and not Pillar 2 groups. What is the future of tax incentives in a way, at least in the case of the Pillar 2 groups, because we see that there is indeed a risk that their incentivizing function is going to be exhausted whilst being a cost for the countries that offer them.
The matter of tax credit is a matter which starts on the blueprint. The blueprint was made in 2020, and in the blueprint there is a statement according to which the tax credit, they say expressly, to consider refundable tax credit broadly equivalent to government grants. So this is the starting point. To treat, the starting point is the tax credit is simply a tool for attributing in an easier way a certain benefit to the taxpayer. So tax grant and tax credit on this side would be equivalent. In order to state such equivalent, because one thing is the toll, another thing is the translation into a law, the translation into an obligation. To transform this toll in an obligation, the matter was written qualifying the tax credit in what we call qualifying refundable tax credit. A qualifying refundable tax credit is a credit available for offsetting any sort of payment against the state and any sort of fiscal payment against the state. And in the case in which such offset would not happen within 4 years, the reimbursement of the eventual difference to the taxpayer. So if the tax credit were only that, if what we call qualified refundable tax credit were only that, the put in parallel, the parallelism within the government grant and tax credit would be fully acceptable. But, this is the 2020. After 2020, a number of discussions take place, something happened, and the perspective changed. The perspective changed so that through the administrative guidance, we saw that there were created 5 kinds of different tax credit. I can say that through the draft of decree presented to the Italian Parliament by the government, we saw that there is another 6th category. So we have now 6 categories of tax credit, and I try to enumerate them. The first category is qualified refundable tax credit. That's fine. We already know it. The second category is marketable transferable tax credit, and this was created by the administrative guidance of July 2023. A third category is investment tax credit. In this category was created by the Italian government. This was somewhat identifiable also in the administrative guidance of July, but it has been fully created, fully stated by the draft of decree presented to the Parliament. The fourth category is non-qualified refundable tax credit. The fifth category is non-marketable and transferable tax credit. The sixth category is the other tax credit, generally speaking, other tax credit. So let's speak about the first 3 categories. The first 3 categories are the ones which have been fully presented as qualified refundable tax credit. I mean, the first 3 categories are the one treated better. The other 3 are the one treated worse. So the first category, treated better, the QRTC, qualified refundable tax credit, they must be fully refundable in a 4 years period. They can be transferable, but also they can be non-transferable. So it is the transferability, referring to this category, the transferability is not a matter which makes the difference. The difference is made just the time. Those tax credits have to be refunded in 4 years. The second category, marketable transferable tax credit, have to be tradable, For them, does not apply the time test. So, notwithstanding that those categories may be refunded in a period longer than 4 years, they, notwithstanding that, are considered qualified refundable tax credit. They stay in the first category, in the best treated category. The third category is the ITC investment tax credit. For those categories, there is no period. The investment tax credit, whatever is the system through which these investment tax credits are benefited, they are fine, notwithstanding that the benefit might be taken in more than 4 years, and notwithstanding that those tax credits may be not tradable. So we have 3 categories which are put in the same line of a government grant, which are behaving not as a government grant. One can say that those 3 categories are the categories, mainly the second and the third, are the categories most interesting for the Italian system. Most interesting for the Italian system for the simple reason that the first category, those credit refundable in 4 years, those categories does not exist in Italy. We have the second and the third category. We have the category of marketable and transferable tax credit in a period longer than 4 years, and we have the category of investment tax credit. So we can say, looking to the Italian perspective, we can say that we are satisfied because we have not penalized, our system is not penalized by this distinction of tax credit. However, I think that this distraction on the original goal, the original system provided for by the blueprint has been completely destroyed, and that we have the tax credit which cannot anymore be equalized to the government grant because they have no enough requisite to be fully comparable with the government grant.
Well, that's deep and very vertical. So I think that we also would need to send a good note to the participants because it, as an Italian example, I understand that the point is that the purity, the initial purity, has been to some extent broken. But well, so concerns remains. But I think that Marco, of course, you will have the opportunity to reply on this remark. But nonetheless, I wanted to ask you a more macro question as well. I mean, what is, in your view, the foreseeable impact of Pillar 2 on international tax competition, which was also a hugely discussed issue on the first roundtable? We know that some commentators have stressed that this dual world, Pillar 2 versus not Pillar 2, leaves, of course, room to countries for competing for non-Pillar 2 groups and enterprises. Substance carve-outs as well offer opportunities for increased competition. Or I well remember also in another workshop that we have recently, there is opportunity, possibility to shift into tax instruments such as social security contributions or direct transfers that have a lower impact on the numerator of the ETR formula. What is your stance in this regard? And yeah.
No, thank you very much. I mean, on this, the expectation is that the introduction of a global minimum tax will reduce the tax competition. Clearly, I mean, we also heard from the other panel. It's clearly questionable if the 15% is the proper rate. Maybe it's too low, but I mean, you have to remind also that in the European Union, for example, we have countries with statutory corporate income tax rate of 9%. So you can imagine that, I mean, finding an international agreement, which is something at political level, because at the end of the day, 138 countries agreed on this at political level, also requires some, say, compromises, and that's an element that needs to be taken into consideration. Notwithstanding that, clearly, this 15% will reduce the tax competition, and this is exactly the objective of the Pillar 2 and the global minimum tax, to try to not stop, but anyway reduce the race to the bottom and introduce the element of the corporate rate in the competition. Now, it is clear that there are still, this dual scenario with M&Es in the scope of Pillar 2 and other M&Es which are not in the scope. I mean, evidence so far has showed that the large M&Es are responsible for the main responsible for profit shifting, and so the problem has been, and the solution to the problem has been focused on the main problem. Clearly, we cannot exclude that there is still some incentives to move the competition in other form, I would say. In my perspective, it is unlikely that M&E will stop to grow because of the need to circumvent Pillar 2. I also to say that there is an international framework and a European framework to tackle harmful tax competition that clearly remain in combination with Pillar 2, and probably, I would say certainly, will be a say, discussion on re-engineering this framework for the international competition after the introduction of Pillar 2. This will be a discussion that clearly will take place at international level, and also take into consideration the loopholes and opportunity that this dual system will create. In terms of say, other form of competition, clearly, as said, the idea here was to ensure equal treatment between grants and tax incentives. Again, the tax incentives are different across the inclusive framework jurisdiction. That's the reason why, at the end in the system, as Tommaso pointed out, there's been some developments starting from the original idea and try to say to regulate in a more proper way some kind of tax credits. But at the end of the day, the idea is to treat in the same way grant and tax credit. Grants are transparent because clearly, not only for accounting purposes, also for public budget purposes, they are transparent. And I think that also this, qualification, this categorization of tax credit will help to make the incentives more transparent. Also because there will be a kind of review exercise that will be undertaken by the inclusive framework, looking at the incentives introduced by different countries. Then clearly we cannot exclude that the competition can move to other form of incentives, not of tax nature, but we have also to recognize that it is already today, because a competition on, say, labor cost or environmental requirement is still today, and so it is a phenomenon that clearly need to be addressed, but still is there. And probably last on the accounts, I think that here there is the there can be criticism on the reference and the reliance on the accounting principles, but I think that this is more transparent than the tax rules, I would say, because clearly the financial accounts are prepared for commercial purposes, for also transparency vis-à-vis the investors. And clearly there are mechanisms in the rules and also in the mechanism of the administration of the rules to check if there will be in the current application some distortions coming from the, say, the different countries, because there will be a mechanism to check what the single jurisdiction will do in this context, and this will be done at the international level.
Thanks, and thanks also for providing a response to the lack of purism or transformation in the discussion on and the categorization of tax credits. I am afraid we need to skip the revenue issue because we are running a little bit late. So apologies for that, Marco. And I ask Tommaso very last question and a quick reaction in the context that's for really an Italian issue. And tell me if our reading is naive or not. The delegation law for fiscal reform, which has been just approved by the Parliament in August, foresees, again, I would say, a special mini CIT regime on reinvested corporate profits. Would you consider this kind of attempts also, in the current context of the transposition of Pillar 2 in the national legislation, as a sort of attempt to bring non-Pillar 2 enterprises level of taxation closer to the new minimum, giving in a way a justification to or a confirmation to concerns of those who have stressed that this new race to the bottom could soon become a race to the new minimum? That will be the last question.
Yes, there is the possibility that this will be the final interpretation. I will say that when a group arrives to a certain level of turnover, let's say overcoming 500 million euros, the problems, I will say that will become much more financial and the marketability of the product instead of the taxation in itself. So I'm probably a little bit optimistic on this side, but I don't think that there will be substantial modification derived on the application of global minimum tax.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you both. I think that we need to go into the second mini session, so I ask Professor Alessandro Santoro and Professoressa Cecilia Guerra to come to join me at the table. We might try, maybe, if we have the space, we are running a little bit late, for further questions to all the four speakers very later. And sorry, Salvatore, for making it a little bit later. Grazie. Thank you again very much, Marco and Tommaso. Ok. Vuoi parlare italiano? No, non c'è nessuno in inglese. Gabriel se n'è andato. Gabriel sta male, e con la presentazione? Uso la presentazione in inglese e parlo in italiano. Ok, allora parliamo in italiano, certamente. Allora Alessandro, mi spiace. Allora, dunque, scusate un secondo. Okay. Allora, questa sessione invece sarà in italiano e diciamo che partiamo in questa sezione dall'osservazione che viene fatta nel report, Global Tax Evasion Report, e nel focus su categorie di contribuenti, o almeno così l'abbiamo ideato, che hanno potuto beneficiare di più, nel senso di opportunità di minimizzare il proprio carico fiscale dalla globalizzazione, quindi individui più facoltosi, ultra high net worth individuals e grandi multinazionali. Questa idea ci ha un po' portato a riflettere e voler riflettere sul concetto di big time, l'abbiamo chiamato tax evasion. In realtà, come vedrete tra pochissimo, distingueremo fra un concetto di grande evasione in termini di grandi quantità di imposte evase, quindi in termini di amount, e evasione ad alta intensità, quindi large shares of taxes due che sono evase. Quindi in un certo senso l'attenzione nel contesto domestico non solo alle categorie di contribuenti a cui ha prestato attenzione il report dell'osservatorio, ma anche a altre tipologie di contribuenti. E per questo io lascio la parola alla presentazione del professor Alessandro Santoro dell'Università di Bicocca, nonché presidente della commissione che deve, come molti di voi sanno, produrre ogni anno il rapporto sull'economia non osservata e l'evasione fiscale contributiva allegato alla NADEF. Alessandro, la parola a te. Ecco qua.
Yes, just a few words in English. I apologize because I will switch to Italian, but my slides are in English because I thought there were more non-Italian speakers in the room, but now since we are left almost only Italian people, I think it is most reasonable. I don't know. If you want, I can speak English. Let me. But Maria Cecilia will speak Italian or English? Italian. Okay, so let's stick to English, and then if you have questions in Italian, if I'm not clear, I will switch. Okay. Now, as Misha was saying, we need to begin with to define things that we'll be discussing in my short presentation. I promise it's going to be a short one. A big-time evasion, we have two categories which are usually included in big-time evasion. Is evasion by multinationals that when evade, they do it for a large amount of money, and high net worth individuals. Now, I'm not going to add anything because I don't have time and I don't have data for Italy on the discussion about high net worth individuals. I will say something on multinationals, just try to add on some data and some policy reflections on this issue concerning Italy in particular. And I will add what I've called high-intensity evasion, meaning evasion coming from taxpayers that in absolute terms may not evade a lot, but they do evade a large share of their income, right? And for Italy, but not only for Italy, actually for the majority of countries, this category actually overlaps with the small and medium enterprises and people taking their income mostly from self-employment. So let's start with some data evidence that we have in Italy on this. Clearly, my main, although not exclusive, source of information is, as Misha was quoting, was referring to what I call relazione evasione, or a report on tax evasion, which is released yearly by the commission I've been chairing for the last 3 years. Now, what do we know, but not exclusively, as you see here, I will use also other sources. About multinationals, for example, we don't have, and that's one of the shortcomings of our report, we don't have an estimate on a separate estimate on tax evasion and tax avoidance by multinationals. In the previous slide, I was referring to the issue of how you define tax evasion by multinationals. There are many ways you can do it. You can call it tax evasion, you can call it tax avoidance. There is this beautiful expression which has been used by Joel Lamrod some years ago, tax, oh my God, I forgot it. Tax selfishness, sorry. It was so beautiful that I forgot it. Tax selfishness, okay, which covers over all the range and allows me to avoid to go into the details of the legal difference between what it is evasion and what is avoidance. So we know from the atlas, which was mentioned by Gabriel Zuckman before, that they estimate for Italy about 30 billion of profits lost due to tax havens, corresponding to an amount of approximately 7 billion of euros of tax revenues. So the first is the tax base, and the second is the tax revenue. And what is interesting is that in their atlas, what it comes out is that almost 90% of this is to EU tax havens. The Dutch politician was, European member of European Parliament was mentioning before the fact that the Netherlands is actually taking a lot of money out of Italy, and you can see the numbers there. But even Luxembourg is doing even worse, and Ireland is doing even worse. Then there is another source which was recently suggested to me. I didn't know about that, by Sallusti in 2021. He also estimated, using another technique, that 60% of Italian multinationals do use profit shifting, and they underreport as a result more than 30 billion of euros. There is a coincidence between these two sources, although in the discussion that I had, someone told me that there are other sources which are actually much more conservative. So these seem to be high estimates as compared to other sources that are available from even from people that are here in this room. So this is open to debate, but we are quite sure that there is an amount of profits which are diverted to tax havens and are not taxed in Italy. However, the numbers for income evaded by people, taxpayers who derive their income from sole proprietorships and self-employment is way higher in Italy, okay? I give you just the number on tax revenues. Tax revenues are over 30 billions, but this is tax revenues, not tax base. So you have to compare the 31 with the 7. Okay, so it's more than 4 times, and these estimates are probably exaggerated. So this is to say something also to politicians in the room. Politicians like a lot to talk about evasion by multinationals, okay, because everyone agreed that it's bad, okay. But in Italy, we can't do that. We can't do only that, at least. We have to discuss also the evasion which comes from many, many millions of economic activities, and then when you sum it up, is way, way higher than evasion by multinationals, according to all sources. This corresponds, according to the report on tax evasion, to more than 2/3 to due income taxes. So more than 2/3 of income taxes are from these subset of taxpayers are evaded, according to our data. And consider that these data do not include VAT evasion, nor the one on multinationals, neither the one on multinationals nor the one on income from self-employed. Now, briefly, what do we know about policies on multinationals? I really very briefly touch upon some points which were not discussed, to my knowledge, in previous session. I mean, we do know that some rules do work. There is evidence, for those who are curious, there is this last slide with references, academic references. We do know that there are some rules which have worked in the past, but the implementation of these rules or these standards is not easy, okay? Because it rests upon concepts that are very hard to apply, and they raise discussions, let me put it this way, between tax administrations and taxpayers. Standards and rules are important. We heard a lot about the multilateral rules, but probably, or surely I should say, we need something more. And let me touch upon, very briefly upon a point which has not been discussed so far, which is the so-called cooperative compliance scheme. I don't want to go into technical details too much, but the basic idea here is that as a tax administration, I sort of agree on an exchange with the multinational. So basically, since my problem is the asymmetry of information, right? I don't know what kind of scheme the multinational is going to use to try to avoid taxes. Then what I do is the following. I say, okay, disclose your schemes. Give me information about what you're doing, and in exchange for this, I will disclose you my point of view about the legitimacy of this scheme, right? So certainty provided to the taxpayer in exchange of tax information. Now, for Italy, in the latest version of the report, so the report for 2023, we provided some preliminary evidence on the impact of this. It's the first time, to my knowledge, that an impact assessment has been conducted on this. And this is quite positive, at least for transfer pricing. But, there is a big but. This process is characterized by what economists would call a self-selection bias. So I am the multinational, I choose whether enter into this agreement or not, right? So I will do it probably if, for some reason, I am willing to disclose this information. Because the advantage I can obtain are more than the disadvantage that I encounter. And I can do it selectively, like choosing some companies that enter and some companies that do not enter. Now, the role of the tax administration is quite passive. I mean, the tax administration is there to wait for multinationals to say, okay, I am eligible and I want to enter into this agreement. And maybe there could be some room for a more proactive stance from the tax administration. Maybe tax administrations could use the data they have to try to identify multinationals which are riskier and try to enter into an agreement with them. Because otherwise, what we're seeing is not the impact of the cooperative compliance, but just the result of this self-selection bias. I hope this is clear. We have a paper on how machine learning, for example, can be used to predict some aggressive tax planning for the curious ones. But, I mean, I think there has been a lot of discussion about multinationals in this workshop, so I guess we have all learned a lot of things. So let me briefly say something on small and medium enterprises. Now, here one needs to be very, very clear. The problem with this kind of taxpayers is that there is no third-party information. This is the problem. Basically, what is third-party information? We all know. As dependent workers, there is someone else, the employer, that provides the information about our income to the tax administration. Therefore, it is very difficult for us to escape taxation, even if we wanted. But even if you think about interests, for example, capital income, that capital income is, again, administered and taxed by a third entity, the bank, for example, and so it's virtually impossible to escape taxes. But for this kind of income, income from self-employment, income from sole proprietorships, all these kind of incomes, there is no third party, or there is a very limited amount of third-party information. And this is true for the entire world. There is no tax system in the world, okay, that doesn't have this problem. I mean, it's not here, but sometimes I recall to people that in Denmark, the average tax evasion estimated for self-employed is 44% of their income, 44. That's an argument for people who believe that tax morale is what matters, okay? Tax morale is in Denmark, I believe, according to everyone, is very high. But 44% of the taxes are evaded. Why? Because they are self-reported. So we do need, tax administrations do need some traces of information coming from somewhere else. Basically, information on the taxpayer, which can be mixed with and compared to the information the taxpayer provides to estimate the plausibility of that. That's the only way. There is no other way, really, to face this. Also, clearly, we do still need ex post enforcement activities to make the threat credible. Otherwise, no one would believe it. Now, and I'm approaching the end. What happened in Italy in recent years? So let me be very, very short about this, but I think we have witnessed a remarkable increase in the availability of data. Really, really impressive. Okay, now, I mean, the tax administration, the tax authority, does have an enormous amount of information, potentially, okay? There still are a number of issues concerning to what extent this data can be used that are associated with privacy rules. I don't want to enter this because we don't have time, but let me just briefly mention the example of e-invoicing, fattura elettronica, fatturazione elettronica, which is used and has produced results, but to a limited extent. It could be used much more than what it is. Maybe if we have time, we can go into the details for this. And then another remarkable and, from my point of view, positive change of attitude from the Italian Revenue Agency, from the Italian Tax Authority, is this approach which is based on, you can say, nudging, just to use a word which is very popular among economists. So the idea that rather than having a repressive attitude, you try to convince the taxpayer that it is better for himself or for herself to self-correct some statements which are not very plausible, okay, according to the data that the tax administration has. And these are called compliance letters, and there has been an increase even within the Italian tax administration. But there is a but also here. The but is that only some kind of taxpayers seem to react to these letters. There are some kind of taxpayers who simply do not react. They seem to say, you know, just come and catch me. Just show me that I really owe this money. I mean, you can tell me whatever you want about the information you have. Okay, do something, and then we'll see who is gonna pay and if I'm gonna pay something more. So There was a report that was issued by the Italian government in December 2021 where a number of ways to strengthen the legal framework for these letters where a number of proposals were made. I don't know what is happening. Well, actually, from what I see, there is no there has been no apparent consequence from. I mean, these advices have not been taken by governments. So maybe there is some work to do there. And finally, we should not forget that audits do work. Okay. Now, in the economic literature, in the last 10 years, there have been a number of papers. Now, more than at least 10 or 15 papers that using very solid econometric techniques have shown that audits do work. And they do work in the sense that they produce revenues and enough revenues to compensate, to offset social costs, because there are social costs, clearly, administration costs, but also private costs. It's not, I don't know if you have ever received an audit. It's not a pleasant thing, okay? There are some social costs, clearly, that we should take into account. But even if you do take them into account, audits are socially good. I mean, they are welfare increasing, okay? So there is this issue that you can give the tax administration as many data as you want, but then you have to give the tax administration the ability and the capacity to use these data. Otherwise, I mean, it's like putting fuel into a car and not having a driver that can use the car, you know. So this is another issue on which I would like to see some more attention in the public discussion. And then my last slide, issues for discussion for my friend Maria Cecilia. Let's go straight to the Italian government's project on the reform of the Italian tax system and tax administration, so legge delega. So the big question is it going to increase or to decrease incentives to evade? That's the question, and this is a very hot issue. I just want to give you some ideas, and then I'll leave the floor to Cecilia. For multinationals, as I said before, everyone agrees. There is no political party which wouldn't start from multinationals, right? Everyone says, okay. Very easy politically and rhetorically, but as the technical level of the previous session, I think, showed very clearly, the issues are very, very complex. And when you come to implementation, the results may be not entirely satisfactory, let me say. I mean, when you look at, for example, the estimate of the impact on tax revenues of the implementation in Italy of the directive, it's not that much. It's less than 500 millions of euros for a number of good reasons, right? For example, one, maybe the most important, is the fact that the qualified domestic minimum tax is going to be adopted by other countries, not only by Italy. So everyone is gonna apply it in the same way, and this clearly reduces the revenue impact. So I mean, I don't want to add anything because a lot of things have already been said on this topic. Now, when it turns to small and medium enterprises and self-employed, this becomes a very sensitive target for politics. And when I say politics from all sides, okay? Not only what is actually what is at present the political side which is represented at the government. For all sides, it is an issue because there are millions of taxpayers and voters there. So what is proposing to do the government? The first is this idea to stress prevention rather than repression. Let me say within brackets that this is not a new idea. I mean, people have been discussing this for years, but it is presented as it was a new thing. Okay, this is legitimate in the political arena to present always things as if they were new things. when they are not. Anyway, there is this concordato preventivo biennale, preventive 2 years agreement. I haven't written anything, but let me state in a word. I think, and I know I'm expressing an idea which is not very common among many other people. I think that potentially this is not a bad idea. I think that potentially, if conducted in a proper way, it could be a good idea, actually. It all depends on the way it will be implemented. And I stop here because I know Cecilia is going to add something on this. Maybe we can have a discussion. But I don't think a priori that this is a way to legitimate tax evasion, as some have said. It's very easy to take it this way, but I don't share this point of view. The other thing, and here I'm much more critical, is this idea that, okay, we reduce taxes, and that's the best way to reduce tax evasion. This kind of Laffer effect, for those who are not familiar, the Laffer curve back to in the 80s, the idea that if you decrease effective tax rates, then you can have an increase in revenue because people will declare so much more and will work so much more that this will offset the reduction in marginal tax rates. Now, this has never, ever been seen in all the experiments of tax reduction in the world. Never, okay? There is one example which is often quoted, which is that of Russia, where flat tax apparently brought an increase in tax revenues, but I suggest a skeptical to read the paper by Michael Keane, where he shows very well that this is not the case, not even in Russia. So there is a substitution effect. People do probably decrease their income because of high marginal tax rates, but this does not imply that when you reduce marginal tax rates, the revenue is going to increase. This is a lie. This is a lie, which is, and so everyone has to be conscious that this is a lie and take it as such in the public debate. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. Grazie Alessandro, grazie per tutti gli input, scusate. E passiamo alla discussione a partire dalla tua slide con le issues for discussion, a partire dall'intervento della professoressa Maria Cecilia Guerra, professoressa di Scienze delle Finanze all'Università di Modena e Reggio Emilia, parlamentare e anche in passato sottosegretaria delle Finanze. Maria Cecilia, io ti chiederei, cerchiamo di ricollegarci veramente alla prima sollecitazione di Alessandro, lasciamo per un secondo il concordato biennale preventivo come un blocco a parte e ti chiederei, a partire un pochino anche una valutazione di policy e politica a partire dalla legge di bilancio dell'anno scorso fino alla promulgazione della riforma della legge delega per la riforma fiscale, i primi decreti attuativi che stiamo vedendo, una tua valutazione sulle potenzialità dei provvedimenti a aumentare o meno, come si chiede Alessandro nell'ultima slide, la compliance, scoraggiare o meno comportamenti opportunistici.
Grazie. Di questi tempi andrò abbastanza per flash, per dire il quadro è abbastanza complesso e composito. Io credo che il primo punto da sottolineare è che abbiamo avuto per il primo anno e mezzo di governo, quello a cui tu hai fatto riferimento, un atteggiamento culturale estremamente dannoso, culturale politico estremamente dannoso nei confronti della possibilità di mettere davvero in piedi una lotta all'evasione, perché i messaggi politici dati sono assolutamente inequivoci, no? Sul fatto che non si voglia aggredire questo tipo di tema, nel senso che in un qualche modo è implicito esplicito anzi nelle cose che ha detto il professor Santoro prima, e cioè nel fatto che l'evasione viene sempre ricordata come tema che riguarda qualcos'altro, le multinazionali sicuramente in modo particolare, ma si nega invece l'esistenza di un problema fortissimo interno che è rappresentato molto bene da quei dati che Alessandro ricordava, un'evasione media che si aggira attorno al 69% per i redditi senza considerare l'IVA, quindi per i redditi di lavoratori autonomi, professionisti e partite IVA, è ovviamente un tema che, per quanto politicamente scomodo, e lo posso ben dire per il mestiere che attualmente faccio, è un tema che va assolutamente considerato, se no non sappiamo di che cosa parliamo. Ricordo brevemente la definizione di pizzo di Stato che la Presidente del Consiglio ha indirizzato alla lotta all'evasione nei confronti dei commercianti, o al recentissimo, ero presente alcuni giorni fa all'assemblea della CNA quando ha parlato di questo tipo di evasione come evasione presunta, invitando quindi e reclamando, anzi dicendosi assolutamente disponibile a una lotta all'evasione, ma quella vera, che non è quella vera, perché è quella presunta che però sappiamo da tutti i dati, compresi quelli ufficiali del suo stesso governo, che purtroppo è lì. E quindi questo accompagnato dall'idea da una rappresentazione di un insieme di contribuenti che siano vessati rispetto ai quali è necessario ricorrere a tregue fiscali, paci fiscali. Il linguaggio è molto forte nel trasmettere un messaggio politico, e queste tregue fiscali, queste paci fiscali che non siamo autorizzati a chiamare condoni, ma che condoni sono stati invece il motivo trainante e costante dell'azione di governo nel campo dell'evasione. Abbiamo avuto prima 10, poi sono diventati 12 condoni nella legge di bilancio dell'anno scorso, che hanno riguardato tutte le fasi del rapporto fra fisco e contribuenti, dall'accertamento, il contenzioso, la riscossione, gli avvisi bonari, le regolarità formali, gli atti del procedimento di accertamento, le controversie tributarie, vabbè tutto, faccio prima a non dirveli tutti quanti. Se ne sono aggiunti altri due nella, diciamo, in senso lato manovra che stiamo vedendo, e venendo su uno vorrei tornare più avanti. Anche le cose positive che sono state fatte o che erano state fatte, si è cercato in realtà di smontarle. Qui è un problema proprio della maggioranza, non soltanto del governo. Mi riferisco ad esempio alle sanzioni per la mancata accettazione dei pagamenti effettuati con carte di debito e credito, che si è tentato di smontare dopo che era stato fatto nella legge di bilancio, poi non è andata in porto nella contrattazione con la Commissione. Si voleva permettere di non accettare i pagamenti con carte di debito e credito senza sanzioni, purché fossero sotto un certo ammontare fissato in 60 euro. Si è operato innalzando il tetto dei contanti a 5.000 euro, un segno assolutamente, anche questo, favorevole all'evasione, non il contrasto dell'evasione. È stato fatto finalmente una norma, non una norma ma proprio un'applicazione che permette all'Agenzia delle Entrate di ricevere le comunicazioni da parte degli operatori finanziari, dei dati che permettono di ricostruire i pagamenti fatti tramite POS, per pagamenti elettronici, e di incrociarli quindi con i dati relativi all'emissione di scontrini e ricevute fiscali, no? Questo adesso è possibile. E cosa hanno fatto subito? Un nuovo condono. Cioè, proprio nel momento in cui l'agenzia ha cominciato a mandare le lettere, quelle che evocava Alessandro, per dire guarda che adesso incrociamo le cose, quindi ti invitiamo a ravvederti, gli hanno fatto un ravvedimento super forte con degli sconti e quindi di fatto un condono. Quindi mi sembra che i messaggi siano piuttosto poco entusiasmanti. Ci sono effetti indiretti, delle scelte prese che possono andare a favore dell'evasione, ad esempio il fatto di aumentare la soglia fino a 85.000 euro, la soglia di ricavi per accedere al sistema forfettario, di tassazione forfettaria per lavoratori autonomi, soprattutto per i professionisti in questo caso, e anche quello, se magari ha un po' allentato l'evasione che si concentrava sulla soglia più bassa di prima, si è ampliato la possibilità per soggetti che stanno sopra quella soglia di avere un interesse fortissimo a stare sotto, anche perché ricordiamo che a quel livello, se tu vai fuori, lo svantaggio fiscale è pesantissimo, c'è un salto d'imposta che è molto superiore al 100%, quindi proprio una roba che nel disegno fiscale non dovrebbe mai essere prevista. Venendo alla delega, la delega ha un atteggiamento molto preciso nel cercare di appunto dare più garanzia al contribuente nei confronti di uno Stato percepito come vessatorio, quindi ci sono aspetti che anche condivido, nel senso di dire rafforzare l'idea che non si debbano richiedere più volte gli stessi documenti. C'è un ampliamento del contraddittorio che vedremo dove porta, ma soprattutto quello, diciamo che da questo punto di vista un elemento importante di valutazione sarà quando vedremo il quadro complessivo. L'impressione è proprio che ci sia un mix di minori sanzioni, parziali depenalizzazioni, minori tassi di interesse applicati ai versamenti ritardati, differimenti del pagamento, che ormai diventerà normale pagare fino a 10 anni, quindi siamo dentro una situazione che può essere molto poco cautelativa rispetto all'evasione. Solo un'ultimissima notazione su questo punto, poi mi fermo, e cioè non è tanto per quanto riguarda le sanzioni, vedremo meglio quando avremo il decreto, però è vero che le sanzioni in Italia sono alte, quindi io posso anche essere d'accordo sul fatto di omogeneizzarle e abbassarle un po'. Il problema è che però noi abbiamo dei sistemi di abbattimento delle sanzioni che sono particolari, cioè c'è la sanzione ordinaria, ma poi abbiamo un insieme di ravvedimenti o altri strumenti di altro genere che le abbattono ulteriormente, quindi è su quel piano lì che andremo a vedere se il regime sanzionatorio regge, perché purtroppo senza la minaccia di sanzioni nessuno le paga le imposte, diciamo la verità. Neanch'io le pagherei se potessi.
Su questo aspettiamo la decretazione, però intanto è arrivato un decreto attuativo pesante che interviene sulla filosofia che Alessandro ha ben presentato, cioè prevenire piuttosto che reprimere. Parliamo del 2-year preventive agreement, del concordato biennale preventivo. Le posizioni sono chiaramente, le interpretazioni sono divise. Alessandro ha fatto capire che c'è una coerenza, e poi Alessandro torno da te su questo, quindi c'è un po' più di ottimismo sullo strumento. Ci sono altri commentatori specialistici che hanno parlato di fatto di un patto per gli evasori, hanno evocato uno scenario molto più drastico, quindi si concede di continuare a evadere ma forse un po' meno, queste le citazioni di alcuni osservatori. Qual è la tua posizione? E abbiamo tutti letto, anche devo dire con difficoltà, il decreto attuativo, non mi sbaglio anche a guardare il professor Ditanno. Qual è la tua posizione sul decreto, sull'istituto? A quali contribuenti potrebbe risultare conveniente accedervi e se permetterà di recuperare così congegnato gettito dal tuo punto di vista?
Beh, potrà essere conveniente accedervi a tutti quelli che vi accederanno, perché trattandosi di un accesso volontario è chiaro che nessuno sarà così scemo di accedere senza pensare di ricavare un qualche tipo di vantaggio, che non è necessariamente solo pagare meno imposte o pagarne uguali, ma con la certezza di non avere delle conseguenze di accertamento, però appunto può essere anche un elemento di maggiore tranquillità, non voglio dire, però sicuramente è volontario e questo già la dice lunga su quanto ci si creda. Allora io credo che ci sia un elemento che è quello che può essere di interesse, poi Alessandro dirà la sua opinione, ma sicuramente per la sua impostazione e che anche in passato è vicina a un'impostazione che per esempio a una proposta che era stata fatta in passato anche dal qui presente ex ministro Visco e dall'ex presidente dell'Agenzia delle Entrate Romano. L'idea è quello di dire: quando tu hai a disposizione questa mole così rilevante di informazioni, il contribuente può essere messo nella condizione di sapere già cosa deve pagare. Però quell'impostazione però era molto diversa rispetto a questa, no? Nel senso che tu dicevi al contribuente: ti metto a conoscenza di tutto quello che io conosco su di te in modo tale che tu dichiari il giusto, no? E quindi non davi però una possibilità di in qualche modo prevedere, cioè non ti mettevi in un'ottica di fare un concordato che addirittura scommette su quello che succederà nei 2 anni a venire. Quello è un'assurdità, cioè, perché effettivamente io, anche avendo tutti gli elementi necessari, non ho la sfera di cristallo, ed è certo, per come è il nostro paese, che se ci fosse una crisi economica tu poi devi intervenire, mentre invece se le cose vanno bene tu sei fregato. Quindi io penso che quello stesso strumento, cioè quell'insieme di informazioni che si dice essere, che loro dicono essere così complete da poter fare una fotografia esatta della situazione del contribuente, dovrebbero essere utilizzate non per un concordato preventivo, ma per una sorta di precompilata, rispetto al quale ovviamente, come nelle altre precompilate, il contribuente ha la possibilità di portare poi gli aggiustamenti che ritiene opportuni, prendendosene le responsabilità. Ora il punto è che punto per poter fare proposte individuali, perché questo è un concordato preventivo, appoggiano fondamentalmente sugli ISA, questi indicatori per l'accertamento, che sono indicatori che sono costruiti sulla base dell'accordo con le categorie. Questo è già un piccolo problema, no? Secondo, è possibile che l'amministrazione di fronte a un'evasione del reddito del 70% abbia la possibilità di avvicinarsi progressivamente al recupero di quella cosa lì, quando dimostra di non essere capace altrimenti di recuperare, e che questo sia credibile per i soggetti a cui la proposta viene fatta? Io non lo credo, per questo io sono uno di quelli che dice attenzione che questo strumento legittimerà l'evasione. Cosa vuol dire? Non che peggiorerà la situazione, no, magari anche marginalmente potrebbe forse rispetto allo storico migliorarla, ma la legittimerà, perché da quel momento in poi nella relazione sull'evasione noi non potremo più chiamare evasione quel 70% che ci manca, perché non sarà evasione. Tu mi hai chiesto di pagare 30 rispetto a 100, io ho pagato 30, non mi puoi dire che il resto è evasione. Questo, quando io dico legittimare l'evasione, dico codificarla. La cosa che ulteriormente mi preoccupa è che tu sei tenuto in teoria in questo sistema a pagare su quello che hai concordato, ma dichiarare il giusto, quello che effettivamente ricevi, e peraltro io posso anche controllarlo, perché questa cosa riguarda i redditi ma non riguarda l'IVA, e quindi evidentemente i due sistemi un qualche collegamento veramente dovrebbero averlo. Allora io ti do questo e finisco l'ultima cosa che dico, e però tu puoi imbrogliarmi fino al 30% in più, cioè se tu non dichiari, se tu dichiari hai contrattato per 30 e poi fai 1000 e non lo dichiari, se lo dichiari paghi sempre su 30, se non lo dichiari decadi dall'accordo, ok? Però fino al 30% in più io non ti posso toccare, ma il 30% è una cifra enorme, perché anche stiamo parlando di contribuenti molto piccoli, ma anche di contribuenti che possono arrivare fino a 5 milioni di ricavi, quindi non è che siano proprio contribuenti piccolissimi. Quindi io questa cosa qua la considero sbagliata, penso che invece sia fondamentale, e vedremo alla prova, usare tutti gli strumenti informativi che abbiamo a disposizione anche per facilitare gli obblighi dichiarativi delle persone.
Allora, io chiedo chiaramente invece a Alessandro il punto di Cecilia è molto chiaro, chiedo a Alessandro di provare un po' a dire la sua, il perché anche nella tua presentazione hai parlato di maggiore ottimismo, e poi Cecilia torno da te con l'ultima domanda, perché siamo andati un po' lunghi e devo lasciare anche il tempo a Salvatore di concludere.
Sì, allora, telegrafico, questa volta parlo in italiano, e anche, mi perdonerete se essendo telegrafico magari appunto sfronderò sui dettagli. Il punto è che innanzitutto io non vedo un'enorme differenza, come la vede invece apparentemente Cecilia, tra l'idea in cui io, amministrazione, ti metto a disposizione i dati e ti dico guarda, sulla base dei miei dati dovresti dichiarare questa, e quella in cui faccio una proposta per 2 anni. La differenza è più che altro nella credibilità dello strumento, e allora non è detto che questo strumento sia peggiore del precedente. Primo punto. Secondo punto, per quello che c'è scritto nel decreto, e stiamo a quello che c'è scritto nel decreto, la possibilità di definire una proposta, almeno per il mondo ISA, che sia una proposta che tende ad aumentare i redditi dichiarati, la possibilità c'è. Poi è chiaro che possiamo discutere quanto gli ISA riescono a rappresentare del reddito reale. Cecilia dice si fanno con le categorie, è vero Cecilia, però è anche vero che gli ISA non sono gli studi di settore. Gli ISA sono stati cambiati tantissimo rispetto agli studi di settore. Le possibilità di manipolare i dati o di fare, com'è che la chiamava qualcuno, la PlayStation dei commercialisti, la chiamava Jericho, il software, beh, adesso si sono un bel po' ridotte. Quindi è possibile, certo, dire non è il reddito vero, però il punto è sempre quello, il reddito vero di questi contribuenti è inconoscibile allo stato delle cose. Quindi facciamo i conti con la realtà, perché questa è, ahimè, la realtà. Quindi io il potenziale lo vedo. Ovviamente il punto che invece Cecilia fa molto bene a sottolineare è: ma alla fine questa proposta dove si situerà e a questo punto come reagiranno i contribuenti? Perché se io oggi dico un contribuente ISA, perché io al fatto che aderiscano i forfettari non ci credo neanche se lo vedo, non ci credo che i forfettari aderiranno a questa proposta. Secondo me sui forfettari sarà un flop, non vedo perché dovrebbero farlo. Ma sui contribuenti ISA, nel momento in cui io sostanzialmente vado a chiedere di arrivare almeno a 8 nel punteggio, lo faccio perché penso che siano attirati dall'avere 8. Ma già oggi se arrivano ad 8 hanno una serie di benefici, già oggi hanno delle limitazioni agli accertamenti se arrivano ad 8. Quindi perché domani dovrebbero farlo se oggi non lo fanno? E una risposta chiara a questo non c'è. Allora, la prima è quello che diceva Cecilia, penso di guadagnare di più, e quindi mi conviene attestarmi su quella proposta, perché a quel punto non mi potranno chiedere nulla di più. È una possibilità, può darsi che questa scommessa vada bene, può darsi che questa scommessa vada male, questa è una possibilità, ma in questo caso il fisco ci perde, non ci può guadagnare. La seconda possibilità, anche questo Cecilia lo accennava, è lo faccio perché ho meno rotture di scatole, insomma, cioè meno probabilità di essere accertati. Però questa cosa nel decreto non è che ci sia con grande chiarezza, questa minore probabilità di essere accertati. Ci sono i benefici che già oggi esistono, forse qualcosa in più, adesso bisogna capire perché non è molto chiaro, ma che sia così attraente, io su questo ho dei dubbi. Poi è chiaro che la possibilità che invece succeda il contrario, che l'asticella venga abbassata e che quindi si legalizzi l'evasione, questo c'è. Però il mio punto è, se vuoi te la lancio come un paradosso, se tu volevi scommettere su questo sistema i benefici dovevano essere maggiori per i contribuenti. Se tu lo volevi fare seriamente, lo dovevi fare seriamente, cioè dare dei benefici più credibili e più aggiuntivi, scusa se uso questo neologismo sbagliato, ma insomma più forti rispetto a quelli esistenti. Se tu cerchi di estendere i benefici esistenti e ti aspetti un effetto di gettito, o è questione che appunto questo governo è talmente forte e radicato nel consenso del paese che i contribuenti gli credono e invece non credevano alla premialità prima, oppure ho dei dubbi. Quindi in un certo senso io ho più dubbi sull'efficacia che non il timore che possa essere una legalizzazione dell'evasione.
Ok, Cecilia, ti avevo promesso di chiederti l'ultima domanda per chiudere, ed è il punto sull'evasione da riscossione, che spesso viene, no, riportata e additata come il problema da cui poi nascono in realtà scelte di tipo condonistico, eccetera, quando c'è un problema effettivamente di efficientamento dell'attività dell'agente di riscossione. Magari un passaggio, una battuta finale conclusiva su questo.
Un minuto, perché capisco che lo fai per gentilezza, ma il tempo sta chiudendo. No, il tema dell'evasione da riscossione è un tema rilevantissimo, anche ancora dal punto di vista del messaggio culturale. Cioè l'idea è, se una persona ha dichiarato e poi non versa, è perché non può. E quindi è perché è in difficoltà economica, e quindi voi siete brutti e cattivi perché volete vessare una persona che non può farcela. Questo è un punto. La realtà ci dice che i dati del rapporto sull'evasione parlano chiaro: 1/3 dell'evasione IVA complessiva è imputabile, 1/3 all'IVA dichiarata e non versata, quindi il fenomeno è fortissimo, no? Sono, mi sembra, circa 10 miliardi all'anno, ma ormai da tempo, e poi c'è quella non versata per quanto riguarda anche l'IRPEF e l'IRES, che anche lì il fenomeno è rilevante. È un fenomeno talmente grave che la Corte dei Conti da tempo dice che è diventato un modo attraverso cui uno si finanzia, ha un tasso di interesse abbastanza generoso, e quindi invece che finanziarti con la banca ti finanzi con il fisco, e molto spesso la fai anche franca perché non sempre il fisco arriva. Allora io personalmente, come parlamentare, in tutti i passaggi in cui è stato possibile, ho fatto una proposta che era quello di dire andiamo a vedere la persona che non paga, no? Che chiede una rateizzazione, andiamo a vedere in che condizioni economiche è. Sappiamo tutto, ci stanno dicendo che sappiamo tutto del contribuente, tanto che possiamo anche dirgli quanto deve pagare da qua fra 2 anni. non sappiamo se è in grado di pagare o no, allora stiamo raccontandoci delle balle. Beh, questa domanda di dire vincoliamo il fatto di concedere tutte le attenuanti del caso, aspettare il pagamento, eccetera, solo a quelli che sono in difficoltà di pagare, ha ricevuto sempre un no, anche come formulato come ordine del giorno. Quindi vuol dire che il tema è assolutamente un altro. L'abbiamo visto, e chiudo davvero, nel passaggio veramente ridicolo, legge delega e ora legge di bilancio, su una cosa che è già prevista, cioè la possibilità del pignoramento presso terzi, no? Quindi che era resa semplicemente più efficiente, più efficace, no? Questa cosa qua è stata raccontata alle persone come tassazione sui conti correnti, ci rendiamo conto? Tant'è che l'hanno lasciata lo stesso, ma solo perché abbiamo a che fare con un popolo di parlamentari ignoranti che non si sono accorti che è rimasta esattamente la stessa cosa con parole diverse. Ma siamo a questo livello. Quindi il messaggio culturale è chiaro, dietro al messaggio culturale c'è la non volontà politica, anzi l'esplicita volontà, e torno al punto iniziale, di non contrastarla affatto l'evasione, perché lì c'è un bacino di voti che effettivamente interessa.
Misha, mi fai aggiungere 10 secondi? Certo. Sottoscrivo tutto quello che ha detto Cecilia. Per tornare alla questione politica faccio notare che la prima voce che ha detto quella cosa era di un partito dell'opposizione. La prima voce che ha detto questa è una tassazione sui conti correnti era formalmente di un partito dell'opposizione.
Oh. Sappiamo anche quale partito era, perché era Italia Viva, quindi che sia l'opposizione lo dice solo lui.
Io ringrazio Alessandro e Maria Cecilia. Siamo arrivati super tardi, chiedo a Salvatore di venire da noi per le conclusioni e lascio la parola a te e anche o lì o anche qui, come preferisci, dove ti senti più confident. Grazie Salvatore e grazie ancora a tutti voi.
Is this okay? I know you wouldn't like to be in my place, I think, and probably I wouldn't like to be in your place either. So I'm sorry. So I'm gonna try to reduce the number of words per slide. So bear with me. No, I'm gonna start from here. So inequality and the increasing role of inequality is definitely at the forefront of public discourse, and there is a growing consensus that both high income and wealth inequality are relatively high in all but a handful of countries. And this is a quotation from a recent paper by Francisco Ferreira, who is also the director of the International Institute of Inequality at the London School of Economics. And certainly, Italy is not an exception when it comes to rising inequality and rising economic inequality. This graph shows the rising concentration in income at the top of the distribution. In particular, here is the top 1% richest adult who increasingly concentrate a growing share of the pre-tax income pie in their hands, despite the fact that Italy has witnessed a substantial stagnation in income since 1995. And even if income has stagnated, wealth overall has not stagnated, and despite the fact that wealth has not stagnated over time, we still observe what we call in a recent work with co-authors an inversion of fortune between the top and the bottom of the distribution when it comes to overall wealth of the Italian households. And when it comes to overall wealth, differently from overall income, Italy is really standing out in the international context because it's one of the most highly patrimonialized countries and one of the countries in the world which has a lowest level of indebtedness for the household sector. And total net wealth of the household sector in our country is worth 7 times the national income, and this share is been rising over time. And every Italian has now approximately 150,000 euro worth of net assets. And this graph is showing you this reversal of fortune. So the top 0.1% of the richest individual in the country, richest adult, so we're talking really about 50,000 individuals here, have almost doubled their share of total net wealth over time since 1995, whereas the bottom 50% of the distribution, which is essentially the poorest 25 million adults in the country, have seen their share in total net wealth plummeted over time. And Italy, again, stands out in the international context, international setup here, because it's one of the countries where this reduction in the bottom shares is seen to be so drastic. So let me now dwell on the complex nexus, so two-sided nexus between the role of inequality and taxation. And obviously I'm going to offer you a very partial view, and a partial view which hopefully is going to fit with the content of the very interesting report by the EU Tax Observatory. Also is going to fit with the national context of Italy. So first of all, I would like to dwell on the direct, offer you sort of two main direct channels, and explaining two main direct channels through which taxation affects the dynamics of inequality. One is very obvious to anyone, in particular to this audience, and is the fact that taxation reduces income inequality mechanically. Progressive tax system takes more from those who have more, and welfare system, by transferring monetary benefits such as pension insurance and unemployment insurance, and by providing public services, it sort of transfers more on average to people who have less. But at the same time, so the fact that disposable income inequality, what remains after this dual state income intervention through tax and transfers, the fact that disposable market income inequality is always found to be lower than the market inequality, it obviously still applies to Italy, but this redistribution force has waned over the last decades. And in particular, as the OECD is suggesting, many different studies are suggesting, this redistributive force of the tax system has been waned over time, and in particular for three main reasons. First of all, there has been a lessening in the coverage rate of the monetary transfers. There has been a lessening in the generosity of this transfer, and also there has been a reduction in the tax progressivity structure of the overall tax system. And of course, this can happen both because you have a reduction in the statutory tax rate, which is on average this reduction higher at the top of the distribution compared to the bottom, but it can also happen because you suddenly start to have a lot of tax subsidies and tax credits, which has been suggested in the presentation at the beginning by Gabriel Zuckman, can also have a direct effect on economic inequality by sort of pushing up the shares and the value of the shares of the corporation who have been subsidized. And so, and in particular, this erosion of the tax progressivity is also happening in Italy, and this is a graph which sort of complements what has been what has been shown in the EU Tax Observatory report, by plugging in also the estimates that we now have, thanks to our colleagues, some of which are in the room, Alessandro Santoro, Demetrio Guzzardi, and others, who have contributed to this very interesting work, whereby we now also know that the tax progressivity in the Italian context does not apply to the overall income distribution, and in particular the tax system, despite a strong constitutional mandate of our country, happens to be and appears to be regressive above the 95th percentile of the income distribution. So the other direct effect through which taxation affects inequality is sort of obvious as well, but is somewhat less discussed, and has to do with the fact that taxation itself, the administration of taxation itself, reveals information about dynamics of economic inequality. And so the taxation itself reveals information about the tax progressivity. And this is very important for people like me who study elements of the distribution. And taxation itself offers a crucial lens of observation on the elusive segments, the elusive upper segments of the income and the wealth distribution. I would have not been able to show you the overall dynamics of wealth concentration and income concentration in Italy without the use of tax-based statistics. And often, this is very crucial because capturing the upper tail of the income and wealth distribution is fundamental, because most of the time that's where lots of the action is. So if you don't capture well the top of the distribution, we are not even able to show sometimes the dynamics of income and wealth distribution. So just to give you, illustrate to you the importance of this in the context of Italy, if I sort of roll back and go back to the graph about wealth inequality and wealth concentration in the country, if I had shown you the same information using the survey data available for the country, you would have noticed no change in the wealth distribution, no change in the wealth inequality over time. And this is because some of these sources, like the survey data, does not capture the upper tail very well. Similarly, if I go back to the graph of the income concentration, so the share of the richest 1% in the country capturing the top of the income distribution, there is something there that I did not tell you, which is the fact that that information is based on income tax records for the Italian tax system. And from those records, we are not able to observe 90% of capital incomes, okay? So 90% of capital incomes, which are mostly concentrated at the top, are not going to be observed. And this is sort of hindering our ability to really understand who is at the top of the distribution and how much the concentration of income is really evolving over time. So at the same time, it's important, but the information is quite limited. Let me now go back to the issue of how does inequality shape taxation, or shape the effectiveness of taxation, and even shaping the potential future changes in the tax system. First of all, in order to understand this question, let me just briefly mention why inequality matters to us, economists, policymakers, and the public. So there are three classical arguments. First, efficient resource allocation. So the fact that inequality is very high in our society, alongside market imperfection, in particular financial market imperfection, leads to suboptimal solutions. So leads to inefficient allocation of resources, and inefficient to the sense that there are going to be high ability individuals who are not going to be able to carry out innovation and innovative solution, and therefore this will hinder growth. So this is one of the crucial elements of why economists care about the inequality of resources. And so we care about inequality for instrumental reasons. But there is also one important dimension, which is social justice concern. So we don't necessarily care about inequality for instrumental reason. We may care because we care about inequality in and of itself, because people might have other regarding preferences, okay? But the third point is that even if people don't care about other regarding preferences, and they don't have such preferences, and even if they are not inequality averse, they still may care about the negative social effects that inequality brings about. And this is sort of the negative externality framework of why we should care about inequality. And here there is an interesting new take in the research, especially that brings together the Merlesian optimal taxation framework with this negative externality framework. And there is a very interesting paper by Morten Stostad and Frank Howell at the LSE, who suggest that negative inequality externalities really justify other things being equal, a more progressive tax system. And this is interesting because it also challenges our conventional view of the fact that we may even go beyond the revenue maximizing Laffer sort of rates, and therefore we can justify from the social optimum point of view tax rates which are even beyond the revenue maximizing rates. So let me just remain in this framework of inequality as an externality, because I think it's very important. Let me offer you two main examples. One that is relevant to the context of the tax evasion report, and the other one that is relevant for Italy itself. So the first one is the inequality and institutional capture. So we know from economic theory that excessive wealth inequality really distorts political institutions and could push a small wealthy elite to capture national institution. But as Gabriel Zuckman was saying in the initial part of the discussion today, we really have to move beyond the national framework. So we have to go into an international, global context. And in fact, even if we take this global view, and this is really explicitly mentioned in the report, this is really what is happening, is that extreme wealth inequality is really pushing countries to compete to sort of a tax rat race to the bottom, whereby different countries are generating dual tax system that favors the wealthy elites who are the real winners of globalization, and generates sort of concerns on the horizontal equity problem, and perpetuating a cycle of inequality itself. And interestingly enough, this process also makes people question, and this is explicitly mentioned in the report, the social sustainability of globalization itself, and the sustainability of modern tax system. Let me offer you another example, which is more relevant, and I'll show you why, for our Italian context. And it has to do with the fact that extreme inequality also generates social immobility. So the fact that extreme wealth inequality today, in outcomes today, can be transferred to the next generations. And so, to some extent, the classic dichotomy between inequality of outcomes and inequality of opportunity may be, to some extent, a false dichotomy, because inequality of outcome today transforms into an inequality of opportunity tomorrow. And this is crystal clear put into a quotation by Tony Atkinson in his late book, 2015, Inequality, What Can Be Done? And he says, today's ex-post outcomes shape tomorrow's ex-ante playing field. The beneficiaries of inequality of outcome today can transmit an unfair advantage to their children tomorrow. And so what is the main transmission mechanism that is sort of plain obvious, that that could also be studied? Clearly has to do with the wealth transfer that can be transmitted from one generation to the other. And this is one of the channels through which extreme wealth inequality can crystallize from one generation to the other. And our estimates for Italy suggest that if we just take the available estimates of the flows of inheritance and gifts that are available every year, these have doubled as a share of national income from 1995 to 2006, and they now amounts to almost 16% of total national income. And so on average in Italy, we have 200 billion euros of worth of wealth transfers that every year are transmitted from one generation to the other. And despite this growing increase in the relevance of transfers of wealth in our country, the taxation, so the role of tax revenues as a share of total tax revenue that come from inheritance tax, did not really keep up. And this is a general trend that is happening in many countries around the world. I just want to stress that this doesn't have to be the case, because we know, for instance, for available information for other countries that share similar dynamics of wealth inequality and levels of wealth inequality than Italy, they share similar level of aggregate wealth and composition of wealth, and they also share a similar level of flows of inheritance in the countries like France. In France, every year there are approximately 250 billions of inheritances and gifts, and the tax system in France is able to capture approximately 15 billion out of these transfers. The equivalent in our country would be less than 1 billion, which is approximately 800 million euros. So things can be done in a different way. And I'm concluding just to allow you to bring home a couple of messages. Obviously here also a selection of some concluding remarks. First is that there are enormous challenges of preserving progressivity in the tax system in the face of existing inequality dynamics and global capitalism. And in that sense, the global minimum taxation regime that is advocated in the report goes in the right direction, in my opinion. Is not sufficient, but it goes in the right direction. It sort of reminded me also of a Tony Atkinson proposal put forward in a Landau meeting in 2004, where he proposed a world tax authority with very similar feature allowing individuals, and very rich individuals, in particular billionaires, to opt out the national regime and to opt in into an international regime. Second point is that the social effects of growing inequality, being positive or negative, so the inequality and externality framework, are going to inform and are fundamentally important to inform the design of public policy intervention. And similarly, is the determinants of income and wealth inequality that can be informing the public policy intervention. Just to go back to the issue of increasing share of inheritances, one element there that makes that information so important is because it's also changing the way wealth is being accumulated in our country. So more and more wealth is coming from the past, and less wealth is being accumulated actively through saving. This surely has some implication for the justification of the current wealth distribution and sort of distance the current wealth distribution from a meritocratic sort of approximation, which is also necessary to justify the current level of wealth distribution. So surely can also inform where we can intervene with public policy. And last, we need seriously to invest in official statistics. Very simple questions like how are incomes and assets distributed in our population, and whether or not tax system is progressive or regressive, has still some very partial and unsatisfactory answers, in my opinion, which can be sort of improved by substantial investments in official statistics. Just to give an example, the report put forward very clearly the proposal of the institution of a global asset registry or even national asset registry. Even if we don't call it that way, in Italy we have something which goes very close to a national asset registry. The anagrafe tributaria allows, in principle, to know the ownership of different type of assets and how these are distributed along the distribution. It is therefore just a matter of also political will to open up this box and allows more scrutiny and increased transparency in this type of information. And just to final remark that this type of information, very simple about how income and wealth are distributed across the distribution, are really fundamental information that could inform compelling and convincing tax reforms. Thank you.
Salvatore, thank you very much for, no, you were perfect, and thank you for the concluding remarks. And let me say also that your work is very inspiring for many of us, definitely at Oxfam Italy, as it is, and we thank also our colleagues from the European Tax Observatory, we're very, very pleased to co-organize this event with you, and looking forward for a future both collaboration and other productions. Having said that, thanks to all who joined us here. Apologize, this is we started a little bit later, but we gained delay, but we're over. So thank you very much. Some information might come through as well via mail, some presentations to all that have been registered. So thanks a lot, stay in touch, and have a good afternoon. The only one practical issue is that we have some sort of 15 minutes to leave the building, and especially leaving the earbuds. Otherwise, each earbud is 25 euros plus VAT on me. So thanks a lot, and have a nice evening.